Hello everyone, welcome back to the video version of the Tone Mob podcast. This time I am talking to my good buddy, Mr. Scott Marquart. Scott has been on the podcast possibly more than anybody else at this point. I think this is his 5th appearance, and this is the first time we're actually talking about guitars specifically. I know, that's insane. This is a guitar-ish show, and my business partner and I have never really sat down and just fully discussed guitars. We've talked strings multiple times, we've talked straight up business, we've talked about new stuff we have coming down the pipeline, but we've never really just sat down and just geeked out about guitars. And this time we are talking about the Gibson Les Paul. We are both very passionate about our love for the Les Paul. We've talked about it on the phone a million times, but we've never actually recorded a conversation about the Gibson Les Paul, and so that's kind of what we dive into in this episode. I know what you're thinking. How could you possibly talk about one guitar for an hour? Well, we're not talking about just one guitar. We're talking about many Les Pauls. But listen to what I said earlier. This is the first time that Scott's came on, and we're talking about a guitar on purpose. We've talked about strings for hours. We can talk about anything. Scott and I can make anything interesting, at least to us. And hopefully you feel the same way. And also note, I said video version of the podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, just know that this show has been running for almost a decade, and there are over 400 episodes on your audio podcast player, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast that you just listened to. It's available there as well, and there's a lot more content, and it comes out on Monday every single week, very consistently, unlike sometimes this YouTube channel. So anyway, without further ado, and if you want to learn how to win a Les Paul, let's get into this episode, shall we? Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, a show about guitar stuff, occasionally, sometimes. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today I have some guy that I've never talked to before. Scott Marquart.
Is it Weiland or Weiland? How do you pronounce your last name?
It's Weiland.
Kind sir.
Weiland. Yeah.
Weiland.
Everybody says Weiland if they don't know me. Like, how do you say that, Weiland? I'm like, well, there's not an A in there, but okay.
Like Waylon Jennings.
Waylon Jennings, yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Scott, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a while since you've been on. I think you've actually been on Chasing Tone in the time since that you've come on this little podcast here. So
that sounds about right. And that was fun, but I missed the intimate one-on-one experience with Blake Weiland.
Yeah, it's quite intimate. It's quite fishy, but we won't get into that. No, I mostly just wanted to have Scott back on because it's been a long time. We're kind of wrapping up some summer stuff, and we were talking off the air about like what are we going to talk about specifically? Because I joked about never talking to him, but the reality is I talked to this man at a minimum of 1 hour per working day, usually more like 3. So we could do a really good podcast if we just recorded all our phone calls.
It's true. And I was thinking back to the history of my time on the Tone Mob podcast, which is how we met actually, many moons ago. And we talked about strings. We talked about strings like maybe twice or something. We talked about business. We had like a whole deep business dive on episode. I'm sure the producers can stick in. It's episode 154. I don't know.
Yeah.
I hear we're maybe going to be talking about guitars, which we've never really talked about.
We haven't really talked about guitars, weirdly enough. And so I've said this to people before, but so the listeners are a little more aware. When Scott first hit me up and he was like, hey, it would be fun to do a podcast episode. And my gut response was, we're going to talk about strings for a whole hour. Little did I know that I would spend the rest of my life talking about strings and be happy about it, ironically enough. So yeah, that was quite a turn for me as a person. That was
it's like moment. Those like 99% Invisible, the podcast. It's like when you're learning everything about a park bench and how the park bench was constructed and thought out and how it's evolved over the years to suit the changing bodies of the world's persons. And you're like, man, there's so much more going on here than I ever thought there was going to be.
So much.
So strings are fun for that.
Yeah. But I do think we need to get into guitars because you and I kind of have this shared love of and experience with the Les Paul. I just got another one, which I know I'm not normally that guy who just gets, you see it somebody and they're like, well, all I buy is butterscotch Tellys. That's the only thing I have is butterscotch. I'm not really that guy. I try to buy instruments that I don't have to fill like the sonic gaps.
Yep.
The exception being is I now have 4 Les Pauls for some reason. Now they're all as different as Les Pauls can be, but at their core, they're Les Pauls. And I know you have a love of Les Pauls, and you own one of the best examples that I've played. So I thought we could just talk about Les Pauls for a little bit. What do you think? We can just gush about Gibson. Gushing about Gibson, which doesn't happen very often on the internet.
Here we are to defy the norm of the internet. No, and I'm kind of right there with you. It always fascinates me, the collectors, without knowing a whole lot. I feel like the pictures I've seen of Joe Bonamassa's collection like kind of look like this, where it's like, I have 59 Princeton reverbs, like all from the same era. That really actually kind of fascinates me. People that just want like quantity of a particular thing. But I'm definitely not that way. I like to have variety, as I think most people probably would. So I'm fascinated to talk about your 4 Les Pauls, as well as the couple that I have at my current disposal.
Yeah,
and have had over the years as well.
Yeah. So I know like the guitar I associate most with you, especially like in your youth, is the now semi-iconic blue Epiphone that's obviously not a Les Paul, but I know you've got Pauls in your life. So when did the love of that or the interest in that instrument start for you?
Oh yeah, totally. So I mean, I like a lot of players, I guess, started on acoustic guitar, just like a Fender Squier that I'd gotten for Christmas one time, and then graduated up to like a Dreadnought style that my parents had gotten my sister, and she never really played. And of course, like I'm sure most of the people listening to this episode, I was just begging constantly for an electric guitar, and of course. Parents are like, yeah, you've got to start in an acoustic guitar, which I think is kind of like a conspiracy that just so it's not so loud, more than anything. But it is a little ironic because as a player, due to the lighter string gauge, I think most people find electric guitars to be easier to play than acoustic guitars. So it's kind of odd that we do that generally. But anyway, when I was like ready for an acoustic guitar, the first attempt at that was like a guy that taught at the school that my dad taught at, had like an old Harmony, and my dad bought it from him for like $20 or something. And that thing was just like a total POS in every possible way, just like unplayable. Like I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And so finally, it was probably Christmas, but some kind of event occurred or a birthday, and I got a starter pack from Epiphone that had the Les Paul Special 2. With a really awful amp and similarly awful strap and other accoutrement du jour. So that was the guitar that I played all the time. It was a black, flat top Special 2. I've never seen. I presume there was a Les Paul Special 1 that existed at some point.
Probably.
That's unclear to me. It was always the Special 2 to me. But that was honestly a fine guitar. I played that for a long time. I put like stickers all over it and everything, and got real used to it. And so my first like real guitar, like the guitar where you're like, I'm going to polish this thing all the time and like take great pride in it. I slept with it. Was an Epiphone Les Paul that was hanging at Reno's Music, the store that I was taking lessons at. And we ended up getting it for $300. And, it was the Hereditary Sunburst. I was a Jimmy Page guy when I was young. So I was like, oh my gosh, that's almost what Jimmy Page was playing. It's an affordable version of what Jimmy Page was playing. And I played that guitar forever. And I could talk more about that. But one thing I was kind of curious about that just popped into my brain. When did Epiphone make, like, when did the first Epiphone Les Paul come out?
That's a good question. I don't know, because as we're aware, and most people that listen to this podcast is aware, the Epiphone used to be a Gibson competitor. And then for a long time, they were manufactured right alongside Gibsons, different body styles like the Coronet and everything, but they were still like kind of the similar caliber of instrument that people think of with Gibson. And then I'm guessing sometime in the 80s is when they decided to make it the budget brand, if I had to take a wild guess.
Yeah, so I just looked it up, and it looks like 1989 was the first year of the Epiphone Les Paul. And
Okay.
I admittedly am a little curious about the history of when Gibson bought Epiphone up until then, because I like most kids probably that are under a certain age, grew up thinking of Epiphone as the Squire of Gibson. They have all the Gibson models; they're just apparently worse for reasons I don't know. And I'm not saying they actually are, but when I was a kid, that was like the way that one interpreted that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious what it would have been like before that, when like the only way to get anything with that shape at all was to get a rather expensive Gibson.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird to think of. Like, I know they probably, if I had to take a wild guess, strategically acquired Epiphone to maybe.
They bought Epiphone in 1957.
Yeah, way early.
And I'm just realizing, I mean, if I'd done prep here, I would know all this, but I don't know much about the history of Epiphone in Gibson's hands from 57 up until the late 80s when they started just, making the Gibsons.
Yeah, I don't either. I have a bass that you can see over my shoulder there. That's a like 70s MIJ Epiphone that I absolutely love. But try to look up anything on the ET280. There's not like a good history of it, right? There's not a lot of information out there. It's almost like the Epiphone brand was, like kind of a pirate ship within Gibson, and just like, I don't know. It's very strange. It's really, really weird.
Because I realize I do have an Epiphone that's older than that. I have this white Epiphone Sheridan that it says Epiphone, and I think it says by Gibson, like on the headstock itself. And I got that guitar because I was sitting at home, I don't know, 5-7 years ago, and I was watching the masterpiece film The Rock, The Way That You Do. And at the beginning of The Rock, Nicolas Cage is sitting on like a sofa playing on a white Epiphone Sheridan, and it says Epiphone by Gibson on the headstock. And I was like, what the heck is that thing? I've never seen any of those. And so I found one on Reverb and immediately purchased it. And I got it in, and it's kind of an awful guitar. Honestly, like, it's cool. It is the single heaviest guitar. It would be a very specific year because it was like only 1 year they did it. It would be, I think, mid 80s. I'm sure someone can tell us after the show, but it is the single heaviest guitar I've ever touched in my entire life. It's a monster of a guitar.
We filled it with cement for extra tone, as you.
Yeah, and it has those like the BB King style like adjustable tuners on the bridge, or like almost like a Floyd Rose has. Yeah. That I've always been curious about. Like to me, I never thought like, oh, it'd be way easier if I could do this with my right hand versus reaching up and notching it up with my left hand. But
yeah, those are weird.
I guess I can see that. I guess the thing is, you could like let a note ring out and then fine tune it. Maybe if you are like BB King and you're like, get it right in that way.
I guess it's always been a weird design choice to me too, but.
You have to remember to like back them out when you change the strings so that you're not like, oh shit, I'm topped out here on the thing. So you have to like level them back out again.
Yeah, it's not something I even think about. Something to look out for. I'm not sure if I would actually like that or not. But Nick Cage is as good of a reason to own a guitar as any rock star in my book, I think.
Oh, certainly. Honestly, I think better, maybe.
Possibly so.
But that Epiphone, so that Epiphone, like I played it all through in church and everything, and so these were the years where I was really into humbuckers, which is, we probably talked about. I became not into humbuckers later on.
It's a sad life.
I always found that like when I was doing like sort of praise and worship stuff when I was a teen, humbuckers like really blended in when you want that like nice rich like humbuckers into a full drive into something, some sort of open pedal platform amp gave you that kind of full range sound that sat really well in that particular mix. But then once I got into like more interesting music, I really wanted the like expressiveness of single coil pickups, and just like all of the sonic tools that came with that. Mm-hmm. I know you're still a humbucker man, right?
I am.
You got some of everything.
Well, you could call me a pickup man.
In the Joe Diffie parlance,
that's what I was referring to. You could set my truck on fire, roll it down a hill. No, I like all pickups. I have a lot of different examples of kind of a full spectrum. I have a lot of humbuckers. I also have a lot of single coils. It's just depends on the mood for me. I mean, I will say my best sounding guitar is probably it sounds weird, but my original Les Paul Special that had the humbuckers in it, and now it's got Gun Street treble bleed and the Billy Gibbons whisker buckers in it, and it sounds, every time I plug it in, I can't believe how good this guitar sounds. Chris Benson came over and was like just messing around with some various guitars. He's like, "What's that old red one?" I'm like, "Oh, this is my first electric guitar. Here, try it." And he's like, "This guitar is insane. This guitar sounds so good." So it is probably my, like, if I had to just hand somebody a guitar and plug it into an amp and their goal was like to get the best sound with no mix, it'd probably be that guitar. It just sounds really good.
So that was your first Les Paul, I take it.
It was my first electric guitar, actually.
Okay, yeah. So we both started on that train, didn't we? Mm-hmm. And there's something to be said for the scale length that you start on. I find.
I think so.
Like I moved to playing 25.5s most of the time, and those obviously feel real natural to me. But whenever I do pick up a 24 3/4, which is really like 24 9/16, it just feels more. It just feels, man. There's something about it that feels much more natural.
I referred to it on a recent episode as Les Pauls are not really the most ergonomic guitars. They're not terrible, but they're not, like a Strandberg or some like thing that was designed with ergonomics first. But to me, I've played them for so long that they feel ergonomic. It feels comfortable. It feels like an old worn-in pair of jeans. It's just like, yep, I know where everything is. I don't have to think about it. I can find everything without even looking at it. I know exactly what to do with it. I know where the back of it is when I'm like swinging around or, being an idiot. Like I playing punk rock for so long, I was jumping all over the place. And, also, despite internet, it's not really internet. It is true, but I've banged this headstock on a lot of different things, and it's still holding together. I know that Gibson's.
You better spin around 3 times.
I know. It's dangerous to even say that, but
I concur with you though. Yeah. I think Les Pauls are specifically ergonomic, and maybe this is like a bias of mine, but like things that I like about a Les Paul.
Yeah.
So for one, like the contour of like a carved top body feels really nice on my forearm. It like puts my hand where I want it to be. Mm-hmm. I like the angle versus the body, the angle that the neck takes off at when I'm like sitting playing down or even really standing up. It like comes back with a much more, tellies and strats are just like a straight shot if you follow the path of the fretboard. I like that it arcs back. That like fits my overall thing a lot better. I think the 3 on a side tuner, well, I know it's not the straight string pull and all that sort of thing. That's way easier to tune in like almost every way for me at least. I
with my short arms,
meaty fingers around it,
reaching up to like the very like on a especially on an extended scale or something like a big like metal guitar. Like my 8 string it's all in a line, and it's like, whoa boy, I can barely reach that last string. So,
completely agree. I think the knobs are in a better place for me. I know if you like to do the volume swells, the Strat thing works, but I can't. I don't do that. And I love the way like a stop, I love the way the Les Paul tailpiece and bridge like sit. I developed the bad habit of like resting my palm on the bridge a bit, but like. You just can't really do that on a Strat or a Telly. I mean, especially the old Tellys, like the ashtray, you're just like getting cut up there. Yep. I like all of that. All of that feels great to me. The only thing I kind of wish I could get on a Les Paul is more of like a vintage Fender style radius. I think the radius is good, but I've learned that I love the old Fender radius. That just like feels so right to me.
That makes a ton of sense. But one of the other things, ergonomically speaking, I just talked about this with Robert Baker, actually. We were discussing the great controversy about Les Pauls is, at least with some people, is pickguard on or pickguard off.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And he was talking about how he actually he doesn't really care. And I don't either. For me, it's Paul specific, right? Mm-hmm. He likes to use the pickguard as kind of like a pinky anchor point for certain things. Huh. So like ergonomically speaking for him, when he's playing a Les Paul, he kind of like uses it as a sort of a guidepost as he's playing. Huh. So that was his pro pickguard choice. Though some people just hate them aesthetically, and I kind of get it. It's a little unbalanced and it's a little weird, but I don't know. I think a Les Paul Custom without a pickguard doesn't look right to me. What do you think?
I'm a pickguard off kind of guy generally, but I don't hate the pickguard on. And there's like definitely some circumstances, like if I had like a 50 style gold top, there's like circumstances where I would consider it like absolutely necessary to have the pickguard on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I always found it a little bit like odd in terms of its purpose though, because the strings are so high above the body, especially as it contours down, that it's like, in what circumstance am I just mashing my pick down against the body of the guitar after strumming on a Les Paul?
Well, I can tell you in what circumstance you do that, and that is when you have a flat top special and you are playing in punk bands as a kid. It doesn't look too bad from like 10 feet away, but once you like hold my special in the right light, you're like, whoa, it is, somebody was doing a lot of just, and that somebody was me. So,
yep.
But it wouldn't look good with a pickguard, so I wouldn't want a pickguard on that guitar. It would look weird.
So let's move through history. What was the subsequent Les Paul that you got after that Les Paul?
So that is a big one, actually, which a big unexpected one. That is Grandpa's Les Paul Jr. Was the next one I got.
1959?
55. Yeah.
Is it 55? That's right.
Yeah. 55 Les Paul Jr. So he was watching Antiques Roadshow with my grandma, and he played guitar a little bit, but I mostly knew him as a piano player. And somebody brought out a Les Paul Jr. and opened it up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this thing's worth like $8,000 or $10,000." And he's like, "What? I have one of those." And Grandma was like, "You do?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so he just like went and got it out and showed her, and there were some things wrong with it. He hadn't taken it out of the case in many years, and so I was playing at that point. Now, I didn't know half of what I know now, but I knew a little bit more about electric guitar than he did. And he was like, what do you think about this thing? I was like, well, I don't know that much about them, but I certainly know where to go get them fixed. So I took it to Portland Fretworks, and they got it all dialed in. You know, did the classic thing. Those early 50s ones, the bridge posts are a little too close to the pickup route. And so there's not much meat in between, so they tend to pull forward over time.
Yep.
So they had to pre-pull those, get them straightened out, and they got it all dialed in. And I brought it back to him. I was like, "Here you go. I got it all fixed up for you. Now you can play it." And he's like, "Now you can have it." So
that's such a pro grandpa move.
Yeah. Well, and then my
was
dad's
that your grandpa that makes straps now?
No, that was a
different grandpa.
Yeah, it was my mom's grandpa on my mom's side. He passed away. Would have been actually probably, I think, before we knew each other, actually. But yeah, he hooked that up, and my dad always gives me crap about it. Like, he's like, I was passed over. I should have gotten the Les Paul Jr. And I said, "Dad, you can come over and play it anytime. Anytime you want."
I was curious because I met your grandfather a couple months back, and I got a photo with your grandparents, and I was like, yeah. It's right here. I was scrolling through my photos, and I spent like an hour with them, and I had not realized at all that he's wearing a shirt that says "Lawn and Order Special Mowing Unit."
Yes.
And
yes,
I was like, how was I staring at that the whole time and never put it together? And I love that. So please tell your grandfather, not the one that gave you the Les Paul, but the one that makes awesome straps, that he has good taste in t-shirts.
Yeah, he got a new John Deere, like, large riding lawnmower. You know, he used to have an old tractor because he's got like 5-ish acres of pasture, and you know, as any professional grandpa, he does a lot of mowing. But he got a new John Deere this year, and so he's really been into it. Like, he'll just be out there just mowing whether it needs it or not.
Yep.
So, you know, the t-shirt fits. But yeah, that's great.
I know that feeling. I see it in the eyes of the neighborhood kids that mow my lawn. When I'm peering out the window, I can tell that they're having a great time.
They're having a good old time. Like, go for it, kiddo. Make sure you get that edge straight. You know?
Whoa! That's $1.
That's yeah.
I digress, but I know that you had that Les Paul for a while before I ever met you.
Okay. Yeah. It was. I was fairly. I think I was only like 23 or so when he gave that to me. So that was a big next Les Paul. Getting a vintage Junior was quite a step up. I mean, not that mine is and was a great guitar, but that was not expected. I was fully expecting to just like to play it when he was over there, and I had no idea he was going to just be like, yeah, you keep it. So
have you modified the the wraparound? It's got a wraparound bridge, I presume, right?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Have you like gone with a newer variant of those, or you still have the original one?
I did, and you'll like this. I was talking to Tom from MXPX back when he came on the podcast, and we were getting into it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, Brian Bakers from Bad Religion told me I got to get the Mojo axe for my Junior." And when Tom had came on, he had just recently got, I think it's a 56 or 57 Junior that he has since put miles of playware on. If you ever see him playing that thing, it looks incredible. But the Mojo Axe bridge is the one I ended up putting on there. I still have the original one, of course, because it's easy to just slide on and off. But
sure, that's an easy part to like be like, okay, I'll upgrade it. But of course, like I still have the thing.
Yeah.
Because I know that the Glazer guys that have like Music City Bridge, they make like a compensated wraparound as well. I don't have a single guitar with a wraparound actually. So I haven't played with any of them, but I know that there's some people that have improved upon this.
It's a noticeable, like if you do anything up above the 12th fret, you're like, that seems not like the note it should be. It's kind of actually odd to me that they made so many guitars like that, because it's not a subtle flaw. I don't think. I think it's pretty noticeable. If all you do is cowboy chords, you'd never care, but you do.
Well, it's one of those instruments that was like made to be a cheap student model, and then became collectible later, right?
That is true.
They were definitely, I presume, when designing those, like, yes, we will cut as many corners as we can. If not in like the quality of the manufacturing, which maybe I don't know, but certainly like we're going to save money on the hardware and everything else.
I always thought it was interesting that was the goal with the Juniors, because they're like, oh yeah, we'll save money on the hardware, we'll go single pickup, we'll do all this stuff. Yet they didn't do the single biggest cost-cutting measure they could have done, which was go to a bolt-on neck. It's still a set neck instrument, which is like the main reason that Les Pauls and Gibsons are just like harder to make. I didn't understand that, and I've said this a few times on the podcast until talking to several luthiers. I was like, why are bolt necks? I mean, you still have to shape the neck, you still have to do all this stuff. And it's like, no, it's just the physical handling of this one large piece of wood versus the two smaller chunks of wood is logistically just so much worse from a manufacturing perspective.
Well, I mean, obviously it's still two pieces of wood, but then it's glued.
It becomes
right?
one.
It's not like, exactly. That's interesting. I mean, that would of course like save a lot for them. The sense that I always get, with going to Gibson a few times in my life, both at Memphis and then at the Nashville one, is that the buffing's one of the costliest things that you can at least like remove from the system. So that's why they've so many times over the years done satin style or worn finishes and stuff that's cheaper, because it just takes a heck of a long time to buff.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen how long it can take to polish, some things that shall maybe go unnamed. Very smooth, polished strings, right? Yeah. You maybe have some level of experience with that. Wink, wink. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that a hint? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Listeners, do that with that what you will. But yeah, that was. How did we get here? How did I talk? Why did we talk about that? Oh yeah,
this reminds me of something I don't think I've told you before, but it's a bit of an aside, but on the string side. So not talking about the thing that you're talking about,
okay,
but talking around the thing that you're talking about,
okay.
So one of our winders made some strings just for kicks. He made like a polished pure nickel, like not a flat wound, like a round wound string that's then been polished. And these exist on the market, but he made it like really good, like polish the crap out of them with different grits and everything to get them like really smooth, and made a set, and he gave them to our director of ops, and now our director of operations has been like tasking him with he's like, I can't play anything else now, so he like keeps having him make more things. But the problem is they're not, in the way that we would do that currently, they're like not something that we could release to the broader market at any like reasonable price level, because the polishing takes so much time the way that we're doing it right now. Like if we did make them, they'd be, I don't know, $30-$40 or something a set. That's just like a rough guesstimate. But they're really good. They're really, really good. We've talked about like trying to build like a whole new piece of machinery that could like do that multi-stage polishing on a large batch of strings. Because right now it's literally him like going one string at a time, like really, really polishing all these with different materials. But man, they are really good. They're really good.
Well, maybe you know what? I'll try them out. I'll make the final determination.
See, that's the thing. I'm no. To my director ops that I won't name, I'm like, you can't keep using his time as a resource. You can't just keep having him go back there to make more and more of these very time intensive sets of strings for yourself.
Wait,
I can't sell those.
It's not one of the perks of the job is to make unsellable product. I don't understand.
It is to a degree, but he likes them too much maybe now.
Well, it's pure nickel. They should last a while.
I have an idea for how you could build a piece of equipment that would do that.
Mm-hmm. So do they feel kind of almost like a flat then?
They feel like a flat. Yeah. They're almost totally smooth.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like
they look like a satin kind of glassy thing.
Sounds like
they're really
good.
Back to Nashville. Really good. So I'd love to do that at some point. And a lot of people don't know. And here's me accidentally segueing to
Go
strings.
for it.
But our Broadways, which are our like pure nickel round core vintage style string, those were initially conceived as wanting to be a replication of these vintage Fender strings that themselves were fairly polished. And I've actually heard it two different ways. I've heard that they were polishing them like with, some sort of abrasive. And I've also heard from other places that they might have just been doing what would be more consistently called like a pressure wound or something like that, where they're like basically like crushing the outer wrap wire as it's being applied to flatten it out. I don't know, and to be honest, like it's such a soft wire that it's kind of hard to tell how they got there on the string itself. If I got a really, really good microscope, it's not impossible, but anyway, whichever way they did it, they're really cool, and that's what I wanted to make the Broadways initially be, were a polished pure nickel. But same problem as above, the way that we were doing it with the polishing, it was like going to be a $30-$40 set of strings. So we went about achieving something of that smoothness in a different way. But yeah, when they cooked this up in the back, they were like, look, you'll never believe what we came up with. I'm like, oh no, I'm familiar with what you did. This is what I wanted it to be in the first place. But what'd you find out? They're like, yeah, it takes so much time. Like, yeah, it does. But they'd be really fun to do in the future.
All right, maybe we do. I don't know. Maybe we do a limited batch here and there to see. I don't know. Well, I don't know. They do take so much time.
They take a lot of time.
I forgot we actually did talk about this briefly. And yeah, I'm remembering now how many stages there are to this. It's a lot.
There are, and it's something where, like, I honestly think I'm just like pondering aloud here, but I honestly think something like that done really well would be, unless you were doing Wes Montgomery stuff or like Grant Green stuff, where you wanted that like notably dead flat wound string. I think that they would be a more practical solution for players that do want flat wound strings for electric guitar, not for bass necessarily. But for electric, it would make more sense, because it just gives you pretty much that sound and feel, but with a lot more top end available to you than you would have otherwise, which is always kind of the nice thing.
That's the interesting thing that we talk about more behind the scenes than anything else, is that people sometimes think they want flat wound strings, but when they actually try them, they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be. They sound really like there's not any sparkle to them. And we're like, yeah, that's a flat wound string. That's what they sound like. Part of the reason rounds came to be, right? Was part of that.
Yeah, totally. So we definitely have people that are like, hey, I want to use flat wounds. Do you make flat wounds in something for like drop E on like an 8-string? And we're like, huh? Why? And they're like, oh, I really want flats for like this gent band I'm playing in. I'm like, no, you don't. That's just your guitar will sound like mud. Like it will not work. I promise you, it won't work the way you're expecting it to work. But I mean, that comes all the way back to like a very old thing in strings, which is that in like the guitar side of the string world versus like the orchestral side of the string world, there are completely different things that you want. So a noted thing about orchestral strings for bowed instruments is that you specifically don't want the string to sustain. So to a guitar player, you might play a string and hear it sustain for a long time and be like, oh, that's a good string. But for a violinist or a cellist or anything like that, that would be like really, really problematic. That is exactly like what you don't want. Really cheap, bad violin strings do that. And the reason for that is like if you're playing a bowed instrument, you want to know that that note is only resonating when you are bowing the instrument itself. You're doing muting of strings that you just finished bowing and stuff, but it just adds a lot more work to try to stop every string from resonating after you're done bowing it. So you do want more of a dead string. And so that's why you see things that are employed in the orchestral world that are not employed in like the guitar general world, such as like things like stranded cores, where you have a bunch of small wires that are twisted together to make a core, which will definitely do exactly that. And notably, to our point here, flat wound strings, that's where they came from. They came from the orchestral world. So they do kind of lack in sustain, not kind of. They lack in sustain by like quite a bit. On a bass guitar, not necessarily, and some of that's because there's, I think, been more kind of development on the bass side of things, but than there has in the guitar. I'm getting way too deep in the weeds here, but yeah, flat wound strings for guitar have a very specific application, and most people that play them probably aren't getting them for that application. And granted, it's guitar. Like anything that, makes things sound cool, is cool. Your tone might all come from a wireless system that wasn't intended to impart any tone at all, but it super did, and that's why you're Angus Young or whatever. So happy accidents totally happen, but generally that's not what they're intended for. And I also think I see a lot of stuff, about so-and-so guitar was designed for flat wound strings at a certain point. And in some cases that can be true, but for the most part, like round wound strings have existed, for the kind of the whole bit of it. Like I have an old Fender catalog from the early 50s. I think it's 51. That talks about how all Fender strings or, all Fender instruments come with MAPE strings made with Anaconda bronze, which is like a mine in the US that was popular back then. But round wound strings, is what they were using at that time. So, anyway, I'm getting way too deep in the weeds. I said the Fender word here while we're supposed to be talking about Les Pauls.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
I did like 3 different unforgivable sins here. Should we jump back into Les Paul land?
I do want to jump back because I want to talk about your Les Paul that you graciously let me borrow for a week when I was here one time, and I made a bunch of weird music.
I forgot you had it for a week, and you gave it back. That's the best thing I can ask.
I didn't want to. I wanted to take it on the plane with me. That thing is incredible. Tell me about that thing. I feel like that was like a big purchase for some reason. I don't remember, like, was it a birthday or was it just like, I don't remember what the story with that guitar is.
Well, I'll tell you. So after like that Epiphone that I had in high school, I started playing in like hardcore bands and stuff. And that was the thing in the 2000s. And that Les Paul suffered the fate of, maybe too aggressive of playing. And it fell off my strap while I was like getting it on stage. And it broke. It got this hairline crack up by the fretboard. I still have it. But it was rendered, mostly unplayable. I could have gotten it fixed, right? But I didn't have any money at the time. So I just kind of shelved it. I started playing a Dot and, that was fine. But I continued kind of on my Les Paul-less path for many, many years. And then it was only, 4 or 5 years ago now that I finally got that one. And the occasion was that I had enough money to buy a Les Paul. I think that was the only occasion. It was, oh my gosh, I can finally afford a Gibson Les Paul.
This is true. I'm remembering this now. It was in the years that it was just, I think, right around the time that I had quit the day job. It was like right after the super toiling years of us working together, where we were both doing like 4 different jobs just to try to, and Stringjoy was reinvesting every penny. Now it's mostly every penny, but we were literally investing every single penny right back into the company and supporting ourselves.
I was
via
reinvesting into myself via funding my life with credit card debt while the company didn't make any money.
Exactly. It was a lean few years, to say the least. We won't get into the gory details, but it was intense there for a while. And I remember this now when you're like, hey, I'm not starving anymore.
Yep. I had bought a house and I was like, all right, I'm going to get this one. So I was looking online and I still had the thing where I still don't love humbuckers, or I just don't use them that much. So I was looking for something more interesting, and I started out looking for like a P90 Les Paul. And I kind of still want one of those, to be honest. I always wanted one of the like Les Paul, I guess it's the special. Earlier I said special too, and then I realized that there is a Les Paul special. I wanted one of the TV yellow, like flat top ones. Those seem pretty cool. And I was looking at some of I think they were called Custom Classics or something that had P90s in them. I still kind of want one of those. But I found this one, and it was like a special edition they made for probably Guitar Center, I presume, in 2018. And what was cool about it was, it had like a tobacco sunburst, and it's not super polished. It's a little satiny. But it has Firebird pickups that like came originally with the Les Paul itself, and I know this because Gibson puts that picture in the case, right? So there's a picture in the case, because I was like, somebody must have changed the P90s out for Firebird pickups. Like, that's a weird niche thing to put in a production Les Paul. But sure enough, in that photo, there's the guitar, there's a PV like Bandit or whatever old amp with a big Trump sticker on it on the person's workbench, and then there's the Les Paul with the Firebird pickups right there. So for whatever reason, they did this limited run with it. And they're super cool. I mean, we could talk about Firebird pickups for a long time, I'm sure, but they have this really, I love P90s, and they have this kind of P90-y thing, but there's something different to them as well. They're not quite as like sweet to me as a P90, maybe. I mean, that's a nothing word, I guess. That's just a tone word that doesn't mean anything.
Are you telling me that two guitarists are using nothing words to describe their sound? Is that what you're trying to say? Weird. Yeah. Never heard of that.
There's a warm presence.
There's a warm presence to the sparkly top end.
There's one of the Dario string sets says like warm, bright tone. And I'm like, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
I think of like warm and bright as like two kind of sides of the tonal spectrum. But heck, these strings got the warm and they got the bright. They're good for metal and for blues. Whichever
one you want them to be.
Yep.
It's warm and bright.
The guy that makes the packaging doesn't play guitar, so...
But anyway. No, the Firebird pickups are an interesting phenomenon in the guitar world, because I think a lot of people see them and they think, oh, mini humbuckers, right?
Yeah.
And I get it. They look very similar. They don't sound like mini humbuckers. They're way brighter, but not as like mid-range kind of bitey as a P90. That's what's interesting to me.
Yeah, you're right.
They're a very sparkly pickup, almost like maybe a Filtertron kind of style. I would almost put them in the same category.
That's probably accurate, which is odd because I don't really love Filtertrons, but I like these. But you're probably right. I probably couldn't pick them out if I was wearing a blindfold.
Oh, you probably could. I think there's a little more low end to the Firebird pickup. But again, talking to Robert Baker, he's had a vintage Firebird. He let me play there in his studio, and I was like, this could almost be a Telecaster for how spanky it is. Like, really.
That bridge Firebird pickup tone is great. I like a bright pickup because I find that for me, like the neck tone is usually unusable if it's not a pretty bright pickup. I don't do the woman tone thing. So I could actually use this quite a bit. And I love, like with P90s or with Firebird pickups, I love the both pickups on mildly quacky sound in the middle. That's kind of my favorite.
Yeah. It really, it's a good thing. And then to get a lot of that sound but in a more familiar Les Paul package is just something. But I also just think that guitar plays really nice, regardless of how it sounds.
Yeah, it appears to be whatever a good one means. It appears to be that. And I just bought it online, man. So I don't know. I guess
Yeah, you didn't even pick it out, really. Like, you
No.
picked it out online, but it's not like you were at the store going, must find, with your divining rods, like, must find the best Paul in the store.
Right. And I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that it's true because other people, I'm sure, I trust the masses at some level, but like, I have not had the experience of just picking up a million Gibsons that I'm like, ooh, this is garbage. I believe that I guess that occurs, but that's not been my experience personally. I've liked most of them I have played. Outside of that 80s Epiphone that's really, really heavy, but that's no one's fault. That's like still around anyway.
That's Nicolas Cage's fault.
What is your experience been with this?
I will say I've played some stinkers, but it's not Gibson specific. It's more like, I love vintage guitars. Obviously, I just got another one because I like them. But I don't at all believe that all vintage guitars are better. I think that's nonsense. There are some people like, well, back in the good old days, they used to make them way better. I think the best guitars ever made are being made right now. Like, people have the accumulated knowledge that everybody has about how to make a good instrument. There are amazing instruments being made right this very second. But I do like the vibe of vintage guitars, partially because of some of their flaws sometimes. That said, I've played a lot of them that I'm like, this, whatever Mojo is, this one doesn't have it. This one is a boat anchor.
I like old things too, True. I honestly, this is kind of a fascinating thing to me. I've been thinking about recently because guitarists, like probably anyone listening to this, to us, you're like, of course, old things are better, right? This is very normal in our world. And maybe other worlds like cars or something have this kind of similar phenomenon, but it's not universally a thing. Like I've gotten into watches a little bit over the past few years, and I have an older watch like from the mid '80s that I really, really love. That was like not easy to find, and it's great. But like my family or my in-laws, they're like, oh, that's like an old watch, and I'm like, yeah, it's like a 1985. Like I really sought out this particular. They're like, but it's. So does it still work? And I'm like, yeah, what are you talking about? I didn't take this isn't like a discount way of getting it versus a new thing. Right. This is the thing. This is the thing I want. But to I think to people that don't play guitar or collect things, I guess in general, it's like tantamount to me being like, I got this 1980s refrigerator. And they're like, why would you do that? I hope you got a good deal on it.
I mean, similarly, my grandpa who had the Junior was he played music, but he wasn't like a gear enthusiast, Mm-hmm. He thought things were cool, but he didn't spend his time, drooling in forums the way that we did. And to the point where he talked, I'm so glad he did this. He talked to one of my dad's friends who was really into vintage guitars at the time and was like, hey, I got this old Junior. The finish is all cracked. I think it needs resprayed, like all this stuff. And he was like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. No. Leave it alone. Leave it alone.
I hear that everyone's using those EMG pickups these days. So I went ahead and had them routed out for a set of those.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And it didn't have one in the neck position. So yeah, we went ahead and added one there. So yeah. And, I heard the word locking into tremolo, so I decided a Floyd Rose it was,
Floyd. This is like every used guitar at Sam Ash ever. Was like people that had this line of thinking, but it wasn't like a nice guitar in the first place.
Right. Yeah. It was some no name, like literally no name with nothing on the headstock. And they're like, I know what to do with this.
Oh yeah. We're going to shred.
Soup it up. Well, speaking of locking, we were having a discussion about locking.
I was going to say the same thing. So that guitar, I'll lead into it because I know you wanted to touch on it. That Les Paul that I had was the first instrument I have that had locking tuners. That was like my kind of personal instrument. At least I'd used them before, and I think they're great, but maybe misunderstood. I'm curious how you feel about the locking tuners.
I really like them. I think they're a really clever innovation that I'm surprised took as long as they did to like come up with. Mm-hmm. But I think people get very confused about them. And I say this because I got into a debate with somebody the other day.
Yes.
the locking tuner, just saying that, I understand why one might imagine that it somehow is more stable, tuning wise.
It locks. The tuner locks. When
a tuner locks.
I press this button and that tuner is locked in, baby.
Yeah, so why wouldn't it be more stable from a tuning perspective? I get why it's
because that isn't what it does.
It doesn't do that. It locks the string to the tuner. That's all that it does. It just locks the string in the tuner. It makes it easier to change strings, but the string itself is just simply fixed to the tuner. The tuner does not lock into position.
Right.
That's
and the
where
reason
people
this
get confused.
matters is because the reason that your guitar changes tune. Now, on a really bad guitar, it is conceivable, right, that your like tuner might, I don't know, that could release some tension there.
I've seen tuners with slop in them. Yes, of course.
But typically that is not what you're experiencing. Like in the most common way, when you pick up your guitar and you're like, my whole guitar is out of tune, that is not because all of your tuners like sort of malfunctioned and gave up the ghost there.
Yeah, they didn't slip.
Right. And more to the point, so like what a locking tuner does, of course, is it anchors the string in there inside the tuner, which makes it really simple to change your strings. You can just clip it and then tune it up and you're good to go. But similarly, the reason your strings go out of tune is also not because it's just feeding back from the other side of the tuner hole and giving itself up. So even like the mechanism that locking tuning does do itself doesn't have an effect on tuning stability at all.
No,
it just doesn't, right? So like there's nothing about locking tuners that increase your tuning stability, which is why most people purchase them. And like you said, I get it. It sounds like that is the thing it does. They're great, like for what they do. That's just not the thing that they do. Your strings go out of tune for one because they're metal and the temperature changes. Assuming like all other things are equal, what's happening is that the temperature is changing, which can have two different effects. One being that the metal itself will go flatter or sharper depending on the temperature. This is why trumpets have those tuning valves, because if they go outside or go inside, they're always having to sort of retune to the climate so that the trumpet resonates the right way. So the strings will react that way. But then, of course, your guitar, both the truss rod inside and the guitar itself, will adjust to the humidity and the temperature as well, giving you more or less bow. And players, I think, often think about this in terms of like, if it moves all the way, and then I have to, when I have to change it, that means it moved, right?
Right.
And then the rest of the time, it's stable. But it's kind of always ebbing and flowing in little ways like that, from day to day and climate to climate. Just because it's not severe enough that you have to make a big adjustment doesn't mean that it's moving enough to kind of change that overall tension. So, those things have big effects. Sorry, I'm commandeering this to talk about all the reasons your strings might go in and out of tune. Another really common, if not like the most common thing that happens, is that your string is binding either at the bridge or more commonly at the nut itself. One of the guys here at the shop was telling me, they're like, hey, I have this one guitar. I use the same strings and everything. This one just won't stay in tune on these two particular strings. And I told him, go take a pencil and rub some graphite in those two slots. And it did it. Because if you think about it, you have like a string over here and then a string over here. And this is where your tuning peg is. As I'm increasing the tension over here, if that string is not able to effortlessly move through that nut to reach equilibrium, you're going to have more tension on this side and then less tension on the side where you're actually playing the string. And over time, as the string does slowly kind of slip into equilibrium, you are going to have an issue because you're going to go in or out of tune, right? This is the same reason I always see people like tuning behind the capo.
Yes,
which I get. Like I've had to do that in circumstances too to get the guitar to sound right. But as soon as you pick that capo up, it's gonna be a nightmare. Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening at your nut. So this is like the cause for a lot of it. But what it certainly isn't in most cases is the tuner itself, as you well noted. So I hear this all the time. People are like, I was losing tune on all 6 strings, and I have lock-in tuners.
Yeah, and the point is like that doesn't mean anything, like from that perspective. And I understand the confusion, but we're not talking about like a locking system, like a Kaler or like a Floyd Rose, where it literally takes, you get it in tune, and then you literally like clamp the strings down so they cannot really fall out of tune. But even then, after a while, that does go out of tune due to a lot of the things that you were talking about. But it might stay good for a performance or so, especially if you're a dive bomber or whatever. Those are indeed locked in place, right?
Yes,
they are.
I was going to say, so like a Floyd Rose system is like a good example of something that is locking the string very much in place in that way. But yeah, it's odd. And I mean, like as a general note, like when the things that to a player seem obvious to be like, oh, the strings are bad, or a lot of times the things that to like a string manufacturer, you're like, oh, that probably means it isn't the string. A good example being like when people are like, I came back out and every string on the guitar was like a half step flat. Well, it probably wasn't your strings, right? Because the core wire is what's dictating that in the broadest sense. And you have in any given set 4 or 6 distinct core wires that were drawn at different times by different people in different places, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's 6 completely different things that are going on. Like a set of strings, those individual strings have like nothing to do with each other. So there's like virtually no circumstance where you'd be like, oh yeah, you got one of those sets that had the defect that every string goes flat by a half,
right?
a half step all the time. In almost every case, as you're just looking to troubleshoot it, you'd be like, well, if they all responded similarly, then something probably happened on the guitar itself, the
environment
itself.
or whatever.
Oh yeah, and that's what I mean. Like because the environment affected the guitar. And then, it happened. So anyway, that's a whole long diatribe.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not to say that occasionally things don't go wrong with the string itself, but and I say this as kind of speaking to my former self too. It's counterintuitive sometimes. You want to blame the string because maybe you just put that set of strings on and now I'm having problems all of a sudden, when the reality is it's not always the strings. And we're quick to blame the strings because it couldn't be my nice Gibson guitar I just spent all this money on. It must be the cheapest thing that I could possibly point at. I don't know what the mentality is, but we all do it to a degree.
It makes sense. I mean, like honestly, if you're just looking to troubleshoot something, change up the set of strings in it, there's decent odds it'll fix it. You probably have we're switching from 10.5s to 11s. It might just kind of fix that. But yeah, I mean, it happens. A common thing I'll always hear is people will be like, your strings buzz. I'm like, no strings buzz. The sound of buzzing that you're hearing is a string hitting something. That is what the buzz is. The string is hitting a fret or something, or you have
loose saddle or
it would be, I guess conceivably I could like make a string that was like had no tension on the wrap wire, and maybe even that wouldn't be very loud. Like it's not the string buzzing. It's hitting something, so these circumstances can kind of occur. But I digress. I, in fact, wanted to continue the journey of Les Pauls.
Oh, please do.
But I have to grab a prop. So can we pause here real quick? And
you're going to be a little while, or are you?
Through the magic of television, we're back.
That's right.
But I wanted to show you this particular Les Paul that is not mine forever, but that I do have in my current possession, which is a beautiful Gibson Les Paul Custom. I believe it's a 2007. I had never played a Les Paul Custom, and we'll talk about customs in general, but I wanted to talk about the reason I have this. I'm going to put it down.
Why do you have that guitar? Why do you have it?
Well, dear Blake, it's because I'm giving this guitar away.
Yay!
That's right. Yeah, we started doing
That's
something
right,
fun last
folks.
year.
We're giving this one away.
We're giving this away. Last year we started doing something fun because the summer in our world is like, can be kind of quiet and there's not a whole lot to talk about because people are out, I don't know, water skiing and jet skiing and all that and not playing as much guitar. So we thought it'd be fun to do like a bonanza of several different guitar giveaways during the summer. And that was really fun last year. So we decided to do it again this year. And our, coup de grace of the total giveaway this year is this freaking killer Gibson Les Paul Custom, which you can win one of several different ways. The easy way is to place an order for any set of Stringjoy strings, or to order any of our strings from a dealer, and just send the receipt to contestentry@stringjoy.com. Or you can also enter via mail through like a letter. All the details are up on stringjoy.com. But it's pretty cool. We are going to be giving it away, so it's going to make somebody's year, I would certainly think. So that's all really fun. But I wanted to talk specifically, something I didn't know until I got to be able to play this guitar, is about like the difference in action and fret heights from Les Paul Customs.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, the whole thing with them was, I mean, they kind of started as like the fretless wonder or whatever, which some people like and some people don't. I personally really do. But they do. They feel, mine has a bigger like 50s neck on it. But even still, it feels almost like a more modern guitar, like almost like a shredder. But it still has the Gibson ergonomics, I guess you would call it. So it's kind of an interesting combination, and it's interesting that they were thinking about it back in the 50s when they first developed those. I think we associate the feel of a Customs like fretboard and everything with maybe more like an Ibanez or something.
Yeah.
Not exactly, obviously, but it's more in line with that than it is like a vintage Fender.
Certainly ahead of its time, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean they're super cool, and it's one of those instruments that I thought it would be so fun for a giveaway, because it's a tough one to like actually bite buying for yourself. Like both, like the price is very high, but also like it would feel like a lot to me to just like show up at like an open blues jam and be like, here I am, me and my Gibson Les Paul, and I'm not that good. Don't worry. So it could be a difficult one. I feel like maybe some other listeners out there can like relate to this at all, but I sometimes feel as a player where you're like, oh, I'm not good enough to deserve that that particular.
Right.
It's like if I can't drive well enough to like have a Ferrari, right? I would feel like a fool if I couldn't really like put it through its paces. But that's why I thought it'd be all the more fun to just be have somebody be airdropped one. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's yours now. Now
it's
you
yours.
have it.
Now, have fun. Well, and then the other weird side of like the custom coin is I think there's that mentality is sort of associated with it. But the reason I wanted one so bad was because I weirdly saw a bunch of like punk rock and hardcore bands playing Les Paul Customs. And I thought, and like metal bands and, of course, going back to Randy Rhoads and all that. But I saw these punk and metal and hardcore bands playing Les Paul Customs, and I didn't realize, like, I was like, wow, I really want one. And then as a kid, I would go to the store and look at them and be like, how do these bands afford that? They're playing like, 500 cap rooms. And the answer is, like everyone, they had to do a lot of extra work to afford one. It's I don't know why that became such a guitar of that like early 2000s era, but it had a big impact on me. And so I wanted one forever. And I think it's really cool that we're giving away a Black Beauty. That's like one of the cream of the crop guitars of the guitar world in general. So I get really excited when we do giveaways, actually, not just because of like, oh, there's a lot of attention, a lot of stuff around it. It's like, I'm genuinely excited because we're going to make somebody's year. Potentially.
Yeah, that's the really fun thing. I still remember, like, all the winners have been fun, but I remember the gentleman who won, we gave away a Les Paul Standard last year. And he was very sweet about it.
Of course.
He was just like, nothing good's ever happened to me in my whole life. And now you're giving me this incredible guitar. And I don't know. It was very heartwarming.
Yeah.
To have that moment happen, and no one believes it when they win either, which makes you feel kind of like the what was the sweepstakes back in the 90s? The Publishers Clearinghouse.
Publishers Clearinghouse. Ed McMahon shows up with a big check.
That's right.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like that moment because people are always like, "Is this a scam?" And you're like, "You entered the thing and now you won." But I get it. It's probably wise to be careful about those things on the internet.
Too many Nigerian prince things that have happened to people, so I do understand the skepticism. But.
Yeah, I totally get it. But you have a Les Paul Custom too, right? Yours is white, isn't it?
Mine's white. It's actually yellow, but it was white.
Fair.
Yes. It's an 81, and I got it at seemingly the perfect time because it was actually back when those were rather affordable compared to what they are now, thanks to Adam Jones.
Yep.
Adam Jones came out with his, I think, 79 Silverburst custom shop reissue, and those were about $8,000 or so, I think, when they dropped, and that made all of the customs from 79 to about 83 just go through the roof. The last time I saw very similar, it was like an 80 and 82, I believe, I saw at Thunder Road in Portland, and they were both in the ballpark of like $7,000 for the white ones, and the Silverburst ones are like 12 or more. So they've went. It's become a guitar that if I really wanted it now would be completely unobtainium. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So I'm really happy I kind of swooped in while it was like under $2,000. And was
it was under $2,000. Oh,
yeah,
you caught it in time. Did you see that they came out with an Adam Jones signature Silverburst standard?
No,
it's out there. Yeah.
I saw an Epiphone one that they did, but did they do a Gibson standard?
They had a Gibson standard that just has like the single front binding and everything, but it's very much got the Silverburst, and it's very odd to me. Like it's kind of like if you're like if they took like the signature Corvette yellow and they put it on like a Chevy Cobalt, and you're like I've got a yellow Chevy, and you're like, oh really? Like yeah, check it out. Obviously it's not quite that extreme or anything, but it looks odd. You're like, there's never a Silverburst standard that doesn't make sense. Like it's not painted on the back,
Was there a Silverburst standard in the 90s? I almost feel like there might have been. Maybe I'm making that up. I know there's always been customs. I think that 79-ish era is, if I remember correctly, when the Silverburst customs started. And so that's always been a thing off and on throughout the years. I thought there was a Silverburst standard in the 90s, but I might be making that up just to...
Oh, and I take one thing that I said back. It is painted back. It is like all black, but it just has the single binding.
Okay.
The Adam Jones standard. And it just, I don't know. It just looks wrong to me. But whatever, it works for me. And this is kind of this is a random note, but a broader note I thought of while we were talking earlier. It strikes me in a lot of ways that the direction of Gibson, certainly over the last little while, has been to like really focus on Gibson as a luxury item.
It seems like it, yeah.
I mentioned I'm like kind of into the watch world, not as much as some, but like, Rolex is like kind of similar to me, where it's like, it's this thing and it's a big gaudy name, and a lot of people are like a Rolex or whatever. But like every like doctor that turns 50 or whatever is like gonna get like a Rolex Submariner. Like when you have that moment and you're like, oh, I've got the money. What am I doing? Have I done for myself lately? That becomes the thing that like every person in America, or I guess anywhere, will get. And I feel like it's kind of similar for guitarists, where it's like a lot of people like kind of hate on Gibsons or whatever, and they can be really expensive, and that's why. But seemingly every guitarist that comes into money is like, I'm going to get a Gibson Les Paul now.
I mean, it's weird to me because like my special, I mean, I had that same thought. There's a photo of me. I've put it on Instagram a couple times, but like, there's a photo of me opening the case for my special, and I was like 16. And I think it's probably the purest moment of joy ever caught on camera. Like, I'm like smiling like you would not believe. And part of that was I was planning on getting some sort of import guitar. I knew I was getting an electric guitar, and my dad went and picked one out, and I had no idea what it was, and I was assuming it was going to be some sort of import, and I would have been super happy with that too. But they got a really, really good deal on this special. Granted, it was Gibson's budget line at the time with Guitar Center, but the fact that it said Gibson on the headstock when I opened the case,
that's the thing, man.
It was like, oh, what? No way! Like
that Les Paul that I got was the first Gibson guitar that I'd had, and it's funny. I mean, I've been playing guitar my whole life. I'd had multiple Les Pauls, quote unquote, right? And yet, like the things that had to happen for me to actually have something with Gibson on the headstock were like, I had to go to college and then learn a lot and then start a business and then have that business be successful and then pay off my student loans. And then be able to buy a house, and then, like all of these things, and then finally, now at this point, you have less time to play guitar than you ever did before in your life. Now you deserve to be able to have this headstock. Finally, now put it in its case and get your ass back to work.
Well, see, Scott, this is the problem. You didn't have to do all that. All you really needed to do was, like most guitarists, just be irresponsible. I mean, just,
that's fair.
That's all you really had to do.
And granted, I mean, even at this time, I had a Les Paul's worth of guitars and gear. I just would, rather have like several options than just like it all be bound up in one thing, I guess.
True.
But it still makes it all the more special. And I mean, I can't, like, from a business perspective, deride that that move. Like, something that continues to fascinate me. The brand Hermes, the clothing brand. It's spelled like Hermes. Hermes is larger. It's a larger business than Nike.
It's crazy. Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I could go on a long diatribe in this, but it's like Nike makes like all of these different clothing and shoes and stuff for people, for all sorts of regular people all over the world. But it doesn't quite touch on the amount of money you can make making things for the super wealthy, or like a really nice treat for people in the upper middle class. That remains where a lot of the money is.
It's kind of wild to think about, right? But then again, there's only a limited supply of those people. So maybe, I mean, Fender is still substantially larger than Gibson, and if that is indeed the way they're going to go, it's hard to imagine that there's enough guitarists in that category to make up for most of us, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's hard to be a luxury item for a niche, because you don't have, like, you're further subdividing wealthy people. And now we're just talking business here, but this will be fun for 3 people out there. The thing is that strikes me, so like there are, if you break up like all people across the globe, there's a lot of cohorts of different people. So like, say musicians might be one of them, or sports fans or soccer fans or whatever. And all those cohorts, like, shop and buy differently. They look different. They go to they vacation in different places. They buy different things. They drive different cars, yada, yada, yada. But the wealthy are themselves a singular global cohort. Wealthy people from pretty much any part of the world dress the same. They all go to the same place. They're all in Saint-Tropez or whatever, other like, very bougie vacation spots. They all tend to buy the same couple of brands of cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like, if you can really tap into that world and become something for them, you've got a whole global cohort of people that you can sell to, that look the same and buy the same stuff. Now, again, how many of those people play guitar? None of them.
Yeah, some of them.
There's a significant chunk of them out there that you can serve. The challenge, of course, for that from a business perspective for guitar is that most of those people probably want a 59 burst and not like a production level new Les Paul standard. But the custom shop does its. They try to tap into that market, right? And you see like the Jimmy Page double neck that was like whatever, 50 grand or 25 grand. I can't remember.
Yeah, something like that.
And each one was played by Jimmy Page, and there's 100 of them. It comes with a certificate of authenticity. So like they definitely tap into that market. Because I mean, look, anyone that's spending, I'm just going to assume it was 50 grand on a double neck guitar is not somebody purchasing for utility.
No. That is somebody purchasing for, I hate to call it novelty, but somewhat novelty to a degree.
Yeah.
It's just because they want that thing and they can afford it. And
to your point, right? Like,
I was going to say, I would go even a little bit further. It's not the person who's buying that most likely isn't even like somebody in the upper middle class that's like doing well, but like 50 grand is still going to be like, I'm going to think about that for a minute. That guitar was for somebody for whom 50 grand is $50.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Like your Les Paul custom that's worth, I'm sure, many thousands of dollars now. If you look at the people that own those, you'll see like definitely there's collector people that own those for sure. But there's like also a broad swath of people that just really liked it and could have and got it. And also a lot of people that are like players or gigging musicians that just like hey, this is what they do for a living. So like they've got a lot of money tied up in their guitar. They
Sure,
play all
of
the
course.
time.
Yeah.
And they can conceivably save that up and buy it. You know, heck, people that play tuba that don't make a whole lot of money playing tuba don't play $2,000 tubas. They play many multiples of that.
Yep.
Tubas. But again, when you get to a 50 grand double neck or 25, I'm fairly sure it was 50. That is not.
I mean, anything above $15,000, really. I don't know if I want to put a firm number on it, but anything above that mark, it's not, you're not selling to your even like normal working guitarist. I don't think
correct.
Normal working guitarists will spend a significant amount of money on guitars, but they're not dropping, thousands and thousands on a double neck.
Yep.
It's just not
gonna
happen.
The thing. So it's like, I think that as a pure business strategy, like if I take me being a guitarist out of it and everything, I think it's a really strong, it's a really strong business strategy. Like being in luxury gives you a multiple, like those Hermes scarves or whatever, the thing that most people probably buy and probably are most of their business. Those things don't cost whatever they cost. They probably cost $500 or something or more. I don't know. They don't cost that.
Right.
They're extremely high margin because you're paying for the name. And, similarly, like that's not true of Gibson's standard production line or anything, but it's certainly true of the custom shop stuff. So it's a really strong business case to do that. You get to command higher margins by doing so. And, some brands are able to walk a really nice line like Apple, where it's like they're a luxury that everyone pays for and owns. I mean, that's how you become the biggest company in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a fine line. But again, this is all to say I can't fault them for the business strategy. And I think that when you see like a bunch of bummed people on the internet that are like, bummed about Gibsons and stuff and what they cost, I can't knock those people because like I get it. I also like grew up as a guitarist and like want to be able to access these things, and it kind of sucks to have those things just like pulled way out of the realm of possibility for you. But at some level, most people being upset because they cost too much is exactly what you want with that business strategy, because that is what signals that to the people with the money, ooh, I can afford this. And so I'm more than happy to spend 10 grand or 50 grand.
Or whatever it is.
Because other people can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
anyway.
it's definitely it's an interesting move overall. And it kind of is just like, who do you want to be in the market? Like I mentioned Fender earlier because Fender seems to want to just serve everybody, which is cool. And I think we need that. As guitarists. Exactly. We need that.
Yep.
And I'm certainly more in that category than anything else. I'm a big enthusiast, but I think it'll be I don't know. Things are going to have to change dramatically before you see me forking over $10,000 for any instrument whatsoever. It's just not really where my priorities lie, and it'd be a huge stretch for me. So I definitely find myself more in the category of very devoted enthusiast, but I'm still not shelling out for the Jimmy Page double neck. It's just not going to happen.
No, it wouldn't be the thing. If I had a lot there, I could see a world where I would want to buy some things. But even then, like I usually like the odder things, and like I couldn't conceive of a world, even if I had a ton of money, where I would want like a 59 burst. I would want a cool vintage Les Paul that I thought was really, really rad, but not the specific year stuff. Like doesn't really do it for me. Versus just like a really, really great instrument. I do like it being older though. That stuff's cool. You
know me though. Like I purposely am like, oh, everybody wants that one. That means I probably want this one.
Uh-huh.
Like I just like I'm just a stupid contrarian. Like all of a sudden, everybody like hating on the John Mayer Silver Sky made me go like, maybe I do actually want a Silver Sky, just because some people don't like it.
Well, so like one thing that I was looking at that I've got a lot of like saved in my reverb cart, I was like pulling them out, is the Gibson ES330s. I think those are super cool, and this is like a funny just kind of inefficiency in the market, or maybe not inefficiency, just something that hasn't really taken on. 335s from this era are really, really expensive. But those like, mid 60s 330s can be found in the like $4,000 to $7,000 range, which granted, that is a ton of money. I get it. I'm not like, that's not like available.
But it's
for everyone.
not $20,000.
No. Yeah. By comparison, you can totally have one of those. And it's not, maybe the one that, so-and-so played in so-and-so band or whatever in so-and-so era, but like to me, that's what I want, right? I'm just like, this is a really cool thing. It's not the thing that everyone has. I think it plays great, and holy crap, it's from that era. And after I said that, I'm looking at some, and oh man, those are very tempting. Maybe one day.
Well, man, we've been at it for over the standard hour mark. We still got to do a little Patreon action.
Cool.
Do you have anything you want to leave the people with before we take off out of here?
Man, it's tough. Be happy out there. Love one another. All that stuff. It's super important. Probably don't hear that enough. But in the time between, when you're feeling happy and when you've sufficiently loved the people that matter in your life, we make really, really great strings here at Stringjoy. And honestly, I think it's the cheapest thing you can do to make your guitar bring you even more joy. Is to play great strings on it. But anyway, I don't want to hub on that too much. Just, be good people out there. We need it in the world.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, we've talked classic questions a lot, so since we're like a little over time now, I think we'll just go ahead and slide right over to Patreon if that works for you.
That works for me, buddy.
All right, everybody. For Scott, this is Blake, and as always, folks, good luck and good tones. All right, there you have it, folks. There's another episode in the can, and if you need more, there is more over on Patreon, where for just $5 a month, you too can get access to all of the back episodes and the ad-free feed as well. There is a ton of content back there if you would like to go check that out, and it's pretty cheap these days, let's be honest. And thank you to everyone who does that, and thank you for getting to this point in this episode. I know there's a lot you could be doing with your time, and the fact that you spent it with us does mean a lot. Please make sure, if you're watching this during the giveaway period, you go to stringjoy.com to figure out how you can possibly win that Les Paul Custom, and make sure you check us out at stringjoy.com for all of your string needs. We would love to help you out. Please hit us up if you need help selecting custom sets or anything else. We would absolutely love to get your guitar playing and sounding better than ever. And I guess that's sort of an ad, but it's also partially my company. I don't know how that works, so yeah, whatever. Anyway, thank you so much. Please give this a like, a comment, a subscribe, all that good YouTube-y stuff. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate you very much. And again, audio podcast every week. These things come out like clockwork. So if you like this conversation, you want more, that's where you go. All right, folks, I'll talk to you later.